Hello, welcome to the Liberated by Light podcast where we talk all things addiction.
I'm Gwen.
And I'm Rob. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about the 12 steps. In our other podcasts, we've kind of talked around them, but for those of you who don't know what the 12 steps are, there are the 12 distinct steps. And so we're going to kind of go through them and introduce them to you so that we are all on the same page, knowing what we're talking about and whatnot. So, where did the steps come from? We'll start there.
Okay, great. Yeah. So the 12 steps of addiction recovery, they were first originated in Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is where I'm actually going to read the steps from this book today. So this program started in 1935. I think in a last video I said 1918. Sorry, that was my mistake. But yeah, so almost 100 years ago in 1935. And I'm glad that we're bringing it up today because I think a lot of times when we talk about the 12 steps, if anybody has a reference to it, then they immediately might tie it, might associate it with Alcoholics Anonymous, or maybe they kind of know someone who's been in a program. But I think there's still a lot that people don't know about the 12 steps. I think most people would be surprised to find out what the list actually is. What are the steps? I think people just kind of look at it as this blanket, tool people use to get over alcoholism, maybe addiction, depending on where they've heard the context of the 12 steps. They don't actually know what they are. And I think understanding what they are is really important, especially whether you're an addict or not an addict. I think it's important to know what they are because then you have a better understanding of what's the point of them and what are they trying to do. Yes, of course, we're trying to overcome an addiction, but how do they do that? I think it's important to talk about.
Yeah, I think most people have know the 12 steps from either Alcoholics Anonymous
Right.
or a drug rehab program. The 12 steps can be for any kind of addiction, and that's I think how we're going to apply it here is
Yeah.
broadly. We're not talking necessarily about drugs or alcohol. We're talking about addiction as a whole, whatever you're suffering from or dealing with or trying to move through. So why don't we just go ahead and say what are they? Read them and share the 12 steps with our audience.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and then I think when I do, you'll see how they can be universally applied really to any addiction. There's only one reference to alcohol, and I'll just sub it out for addiction here.
Okay.
So step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 3, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Step 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Step 5, we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Step 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Step 7, we humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. Step 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 9, we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Step 10, we continued to take personal inventory and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Step 11, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to addicts and to practice these principles in all our affairs. I guess there were 2 references to alcoholics, but yeah.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, that's the 12 steps, 1 through 12, pretty all inclusive. Um, so in there, none of them say to necessarily stop the addiction. So how do they work exactly? So if you're to work the 12 steps, how do they work?
Okay, yeah, that's a really great question. So I love that you pointed that out, that there is not actually a single step that says stop your addiction. In fact, I will also point out there isn't a single step that even talks about your addiction at all. Step 1 does not directly talk about it. It just says you recognize you're kind of powerless over your addiction, that you have not been able to fix things your way. But there is not another single step that even references the addiction at all. All of these things are really just targeting your emotional and spiritual health because the 12-step program, the 12 steps, what they're really striving to help you do is reorient yourself to a more spiritual way of living. Because the idea here is that you're you're off balance. Like if you have an addiction, it's like if you imagined a scale tipping, you're adding things to one side, one side, one side until it just tips. And that's kind of what an addiction comes from. We accumulate this pain in our life and we're just trying to feel better. And at some point we're running and running over to our addiction over and over again to feel better. And so what the 12 steps are designed to do is to teach you and to train you how to feel better a different way. So instead of using your addiction, this is literally a training manual for how to feel better but using a higher power. So it does specify here, it says, it does talk about God, but it also specifies God as you understand him. And so there's another part of this book that talks about how it's not a religious program. So the talk of God sometimes can turn people off and think, oh, so like you're going to church. No, not at all. In fact, for me, I'm someone who has gone to church my whole life, someone who has felt like I believed in God my whole life. But it wasn't until I delved deeply into this 12-step program, the 12-step, this layout, this formula, that I think that I really came to know who God was intimately in a way, where he could show up in my life to make me feel better in really, really, really beautiful ways. So yeah, that's it. That's what the 12 steps are there. They are designed to train us how to kind of switch gears and how to feel better using something that is, well, I mean, it's more powerful than our addictions ever could be.
Mm. I like how you point out it doesn't necessarily have to be God. It can be a higher power, whatever you believe in. It's mainly to help you recognize. I mean, like I said, first one says you have a problem and you need help from somewhere to overcome this. And the
Mm-hmm.
12 steps kind of walk that through on relying on something other than yourself. You
Right.
got yourself there.
Right.
Something else that needs to help pull you out.
Yeah, and I would say, just to kind of clarify, because you mentioned not necessarily God, just a higher power. I mean, the book and the program, it does say God. This is kind of their reference for their higher power. So for me, I say God. That's what I call my higher power.
Yeah.
So I would say not so much like God or a higher power. It's like your higher power, whatever you call your higher power.
Yeah, for you, for me, we're believers. We believe in God. So our power would be God.
Mhm.
For necessarily from some of our audience, their higher power could be whatever they believe in.
Right.
So
Right. But yeah, so just this idea that it is a power bigger than you, a third party out there somewhere thing that can do for you what you have not yet been able to do for yourself.
awesome. Okay. So why do people have such a hard time? You looked at these; they're pretty
Mhm.
simple, they're straightforward, pretty easy language to understand. Why is it so hard for people to understand them, or to execute on them,
Mhm.
or to make it so something that they can live and use and overcome their addiction?
That's a really great question. I could answer that from so many different ways. My first thought, though, is that I think that if you are looking at this through the lens of I am going to do these steps so that I can stop my addiction, first and foremost, then you're always measuring it by what's happening between me and my addiction. And so if you come in and understand that this is a program, this is a formula for how to feel better using God, then I think it will pique your interest in a different way. If you are an addict who is just looking at, okay, I'm destroying my life, I keep lighting fires and watching them burn, I'm hurting myself, I'm hurting people I love, and it sucks, well, you're going to hit rock bottom eventually. And probably you're going to hit rock bottom more than once. Because when we hit rock bottom, it scares us just enough to try again.
Yeah.
So any addict probably will tell you, that a recovered addict will be able to tell you when they hit rock bottom, but really that was their last rock bottom. But if you ask them the other times in their life they thought it was rock bottom, they probably can give you a list. And so when you hit rock bottom, you find something scary enough to move you into this program where you're finally like, whatever it takes, I have to stop the destruction in my life. Now, if you are looking at this as a program that is going to take something away from you, and not just something, but something that is important and that you love. And I hate to say it that way because I mean, but that is kind of where we're at with our addiction. You know what I mean? It's a love-hate relationship. I know it's like, why am I doing this? It just causes destruction. Well, I think it's important to look at it and why. It's because we do want power. I mean, in some way, in some form, I think addiction a lot of times is a response to feeling powerless in our lives. And so for you to look at this 12-step program, whether you know the 12 steps or not, even just walking in the door of a program, of a fellowship, of a meeting, I think that if you're looking at it from the lens of I'm scared enough to try again, I know it's going to suck. I know it's going to be hard. You want to take something dear to me away, but I have to because, what I'm doing sucks. In fact, one addiction manual I read recently, it talked about how, when the pain of the problem becomes worse than the pain of the solution, you're willing to try the solution. But that kind of frames out the expectation that the solution is going to make you suffer. And if you don't know how to feel better when you're suffering without your addiction, that's a very difficult dialogue to enter into because you're saying, okay, I'm going to let you take my addiction away, but you don't know how to feel better without your addiction. You literally have not learned the skills yet. These will give you the skills on how to feel better. But if you're only looking at it through the lens of, these will teach me how to let go of this thing that's very important to me and helps me breathe and function in my life, oh, that's harder than if you have the understanding of, oh, I use my addiction to feel better and to find release and to find a counterfeit peace because I don't know where actually to find peace. Then I think it's a different perspective. If you look at this and say, this is how you get peace. Because it's not the 12 steps themselves. It is the power of your higher power that can bring you the peace you're looking for.
So as you were moving through your recovery,
Yeah.
did you find that you were suffering more or less, or as maybe tell us a little bit about that because a lot of people maybe assume that when they hit rock bottom, they're definitely suffering when they're hitting rock bottom.
Yeah.
But as you start to climb out, maybe it's like up and then hit rock bottom. You climb up and you hit rock bottom, and there might be a mentality of, oh, this is so much suffering. What was your journey like?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I love that question. I'm going to tell you because I had a journey that did take me through a 12-step program multiple times, meaning I kept hitting rock bottom and coming back. So I hit rock bottom multiple times, and every time I did, there was part of me had a sense of relief because it was like, I know it can't get worse than this. This is so terrifying. This is so shameful. This is so humiliating. This is so big and dangerous that there's no way I would come back to this moment. There's no way. Of course I'll do whatever it takes. And then I'd get in, and try to start doing the program again. And then, there's a part here that talks about taking an inventory of your life. That's step 4. And I would get that far and get stuck because I was looking at the program wrong. First of all, I thought it was going to take something away. We did another episode about the 2 lies of addiction recovery that built out my framework for what my expectation was, which was I believed that the program itself, all it could offer me was to be willing and able to white knuckle my way through the temptation for my addiction for the rest of my life. And with that perspective, again, so I'll never actually feel better. I'll just learn to not do that thing anymore. And so for me, I would come into the program and I would get to step 3, which says to make a decision to turn your will over to God. And for me, I'm like, well, that must be where I'm supposed to give up my addiction then. I mean, what other way could I possibly show my willingness to give up my will to God than to stop doing this thing that's destroying my life and the lives of people I love? And then I would sort of white knuckle my way here. At step 3, I'm ready because I've hit rock bottom and my life sucks and now I'm ready. And then I'd go into this place where I'm kind of picking at all the pain in my life that I've ever felt, all the things I've ever done and feel guilt about, all the things that people have done to me that I'm still very angry or fearful about. And so that's what you do in step 4 is you take this moral inventory. And I could never get through that without my addiction. I didn't know how to feel better with God yet. I hadn't learned that skill. That skill comes later in the steps. And so because I didn't, understand that's what the point was of the program, because I thought it was just to stop, the gush of water coming out of my broken pipe, by mopping the floors. I don't know if that metaphor hit right. But anyway, I thought, the point was to stop my addiction, not to feel better. And so, but I
So
would,
going
yeah.
back to that metaphor, you felt like you were in a flood, and if you're in your house and a pipe bursts and you've got water all over the floor, and instead of turning off the water or instead of turning or plugging the pipe, you grab a mop and you try to mop up the water, and the pipe
Yeah.
is bringing it faster than the mop can soak it up. You're
Yeah.
kind of trying to fight a losing battle.
Yes.
a mop is not going to outperform the gush of water. And
Yeah.
so that's what you were saying is your addiction felt like is you were trying to go and turn off, or you were trying to mop up the addiction when it was
Yeah.
still you were struggling with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Because, yeah. So I thought that's all I could hope for. The broken pipe is you once an addict, always an addict. You're always going to have that pull and that push to move into this place of craving and temptation and all of these things. So there's nothing you can do about the broken pipe. Sorry. But you better just keep mopping floors and you're going to be mopping floors for the rest of your life. But don't worry, God will give you power to mop really fast.
Well, and I
And
think
that's
that's
what I
where
thought was the best I could hope for.
yeah, and I think that's where it comes in is like that would be yeah, if you keep on doing that, you get a sense of
Exhausting.
this is it's exhausting, but it's also
Mhm.
like you get a sense of futility. It's like
Mhm.
I've got all this water coming in and I'm trying to mop it up, but it keeps on coming faster. And it's like that overwhelm of,
Yeah.
like if you're in
Yeah.
the ocean and you try to catch a breath and a wave hits you and you get salt water in your mouth and you like come up gasping and trying to get more air, but more water comes in. It's like
Mhm.
you feel like you're drowning, and it's just like at some point, do I give up or do I keep on fighting?
That's a great metaphor. Yes. Absolutely. I think it's a great metaphor. And what the 12 steps actually do, if you do them correctly, is it helps you turn off the water. It helps you fix the pipe. You know what I mean? And that's why people that I've worked with in the past, as I've sponsored people and stuff, I'm like, stop staring at the addiction. Stop fighting the addiction. You are just mopping up floors. You do this, none of which says anything about the addiction at all. And that teaches you how to turn off the pipe, to turn off the water so that you can repair the pipe and you don't have to worry about mopping up floors. And so for me, that's where I would get stuck because I didn't know yet how to feel better. I didn't even know that was the point. Like I said, I thought I was just gearing up to mop for the rest of my life. And so I would get exhausted, and I'm like, well, I'm just not ready. I'm just too weak right now. Maybe tomorrow, next week, next year, whatever it was back in that last meal mentality. And that I just stayed there for, 15 years. I just stayed there, back and forth and back and forth. And in that period of time, I would hit rock bottoms. But it was for a long time, it was that ping pong matchup. I am hitting rock bottom and I'm terrified to see the amount of destruction I am capable of doing to my own life and the lives of people I love. It was terrifying. So I'd hit rock bottom and then I would go back, into like, oh, okay, this time I'm gonna really try. But then when you get in that place of desperation again, you just need relief. One point I'll say, and then you can move on to the next question. For me, I did a therapy a few years ago, and one of the things that they highlighted was that there were two sets of skills that they had to teach us. One was, the set of skills you will use to like move through your life in productive and healthy ways. But then also it was like, but if you're in fight or flight, if you are, in survival mode, well, there's a totally different set of skills you need to apply in order to come out of that so that you can apply skills. And I think it's that kind of a thing. I was just being ping ponged back and forth between two fight or flight spaces. Here I am rock bottom and I'm terrified, so I'm running this way. And then here I am being so triggered and trying to not use my addiction. And then I'm in again that fight or flight mode of like I'm in, crisis and I just need relief. And here I go back to my addiction because I hadn't yet learned how to use my higher power in a way that would allow me to move out of that fight or flight so that I could apply skills to progress.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So for someone who either has used a 12-step program before or currently using one or maybe looking into it, when you felt that overwhelm, what kept you going? What helped you maybe turn something that was you felt so futile about into something that you could turn into a positive and go, okay, I can live another day, I can work it
Yeah.
another day. What brought you to on the other side of the pain?
That's such a great question. I will tell you that at the time, it looked like absolute and complete failure. Because again, if you go back to the one we did on the two lies of addiction recovery, one of them is that expectation that in order to successfully move through the steps, you have to give up your addiction. Again, I thought that was in step 3. It doesn't say give it up, but it does say give up your will. And like I said, what more can I possibly do to show my willingness than to give up my addiction? But honestly, if you could give up your addiction that easily by yourself, you wouldn't need your higher power in the first place. And so for me, like I said, it was absolute, complete, and utter failure to do that. But I kept doing the steps anyway. So I was working with a sponsor at the time who said, "Hey, it's not the food." And well, specifically, she's like, "It's not ingredients. It's not, the sugar. You think it's the sugar, but it's actually compulsive overeating. You're just having this, compulsion to want to gorge and all of these things." And so for me, still trying to, fight against that addiction though, and that compulsion and things like that, I meant to stop. I meant to. I really did. And I just didn't. The first sponsor I had worked with, I had white knuckled my way through it for a few days and then woke up one day and it was like gone. Like the compulsion was gone. And it was this mysterious, miraculous thing. A few weeks later, it came back. I was switching between sponsors, and it came back. And so I thought, oh well, all I have to do is white knuckle my way through just a few days, and then I'll go back to that amazing magical feeling. And so I'm like, just 3 days. I mean, I already have ice cream in my freezer. I might as well finish that first. And then by the time that was gone, I was like, well, my son's Halloween candy's right there, so probably let's just wait till Halloween, and you know what I mean. And it just, that last meal mentality just never came. And so even though I was working with a new sponsor and I kept meaning to give up the food, I kept meaning to let go of my addiction, I didn't. I just never did. But I kept doing the steps. And what I found was that as I moved through this process that seems to have nothing to do with addiction, because none of it is staring at it head on. None of it is saying step 7, journal every day about how hard it is to give up your addiction, but your willingness to do it anyway. None of them are like that. But I kept doing this. I kept doing them. And then what I saw is like, I was recognizing that I was feeling better by doing these things. And then as I continued to do both my addiction and the steps side by side, I think for me that was very significant because I didn't have some fantasy about what my addiction did for me or what it could do. I did them side by side. Literally, like the same night, I might move through a binge fest and then realize I still feel like crap. Maybe I should try that God thing. Maybe I should try step 10 and see if that helps because I still feel horrible. And then I would, and I would feel better. And so for me, it was kind of amazing to have both of those experiences because, like I said, it wasn't the fantasy of what I remember my addiction being or whatever, but literally side by side and seeing, oh, this God thing works to make me feel better, to relieve me of my emotional stress, anxiety, fear, whatever it was. It worked better, faster, it lasted longer, and it didn't take anything from me. My addiction gave me so much for a minute, and then it took so much. And God came and gave me more and took nothing. And so for me, it just became really easy to reach past my addiction and go straight to that God thing.
So would you say that you kind of felt like as you were trying to give up your addiction, you'd give it up a little bit more and then a little bit more, and but
Yeah.
you're still in your addiction, you're still working the steps, but as you work the steps, you went to the food a little bit less or a
Yeah.
little bit less often, a little less, gorging, whatever. And that's where the will comes in is you're willing to engage in a process, in a conversation with your higher power, going, okay, this is what I can give you. And God goes, okay, this is what I'm going to take. I'm going to help you, and I'll take the rest. You gave me this, I'll take the rest. And okay, good. And the next time, I'll give you a little bit more, and I'll take the rest. Is that kind of a good synopsis of that?
I think yes, I will say it in a different way, although
Okay.
I think it is a good synopsis, but I want to say that it wasn't two things I have to point out here. One, I never wrestled my addiction because I got to a point where I was like, I just didn't. I couldn't. I was so tired. This I could do. That seemed a whole lot easier. The steps seemed a whole lot easier than saying I'm never going to blank again, which was something I had tried and failed and tried and failed and tried and failed and tried and failed. But this, yeah, I could do that. And as I did it, so I did not wrestle my addiction out. Instead, I invested my recovery minutes into dialing this in. So I did not practice and practice and practice not engaging my
So
addiction.
dialing this in meaning dialing in the
The
steps.
steps, I
Okay.
did not practice and practice and practice not going to my addiction. I practiced because that was a complete failure over there.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did do is practice and practice and practice developing these new skills, none of which say don't do your addiction, but they do say do this, have conscious contact with God every day. They do say do this, correct your mistakes as you go. They do say, hey, share the message of hope with other people. Those things seemed more doable to me than saying never gorge and binge again. never eat sugar again, never eat
Mm.
white flour again. And so I gave up on the impossible things and started doing this. And that's where I invested my recovery minutes. And as I did this, I lost my interest in my addiction. So, for example, there's a quote I heard once that I love, and it said, "When there is no demon within, the demons without have no power." I didn't know that was going to be the side effect of doing this. I didn't know this was possible. I didn't know that my addiction could peacefully remove itself from my life. I didn't understand that about the 12 steps. I didn't know that was the promise. I didn't know it was an option. I thought I was just going to suffer always, but maybe I wouldn't be suffering and binging. I could just suffer and quietly and be in pain by myself without hurting other people. And so for me, I just want to say that it wasn't as I pushed my addiction more and more out, it made more room for God. It was the opposite. God does not need you to move your addiction over so he can come in. He just needs us to ask him to show up and give him that invitation so that he can show us what he can do. Because I think what happens a lot of times is when we're in a place of addiction, we've built a very long history of trust with our addiction. We know we can rely on it to do this thing for us every single time. Yes, there's a fallout, but in that place of fight or flight and our nervous system is wrecked and we just need relief, we know our addiction will do the trick. And so what I had to do and what I had to dial in was giving God an opportunity to show up every single time when I was in a place of fight or flight and when my nervous system was completely wrecked, to give him a chance. And what I have discovered is that he will every single time, every single time. I didn't trust that it would be every single time, so it took me a minute to figure that out and to give him more and more opportunities. And as I did, I learned to trust him more. And it wasn't that he did a bigger and bigger work. It's just that I flipped the switch more and more often and let him do the work until it became so second nature that I trusted him. And like I said, he did it better, faster, and it lasted longer than my addiction. And so it was easy to reach past it.
Yeah, and I think what I was trying to get at is that we just have to give our will. We have to have a will to do something. And
Yeah.
so how it happens, it might be individual for each one of you. But as your will was, okay, I'm going to turn the steps. I'm willing to
Oh,
look at the
yeah.
steps. I'm willing to turn to number 10 or willing to conscious contact with God or serve or whatever. So your
Hmm.
willingness to engage in those steps is what kind of took you from steering you from your addiction more towards God and going,
Hmm.
okay, instead of going this way, I'm going to gently correct this by putting my will into something else, pointing your
Hmm.
ship to a different direction, going, okay, I don't want my addiction, but I know that I can do this step and this step and this step. And so I'm going to go over and do those steps. And that kind of shifted your focus from the addiction into
Yeah.
this is the step that I'm going to work on, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And by doing that, your focus shifted, and it kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
helped you
Yeah.
give your will. So that's, I guess, what we're talking about is we know that we can't do it ourselves. We're powerless. We just have to give our
Yeah.
will to God.
Yes, and don't confuse that with thinking your addiction is your will. No, like not at all. Like your will, I love the way that you said that.
So it could be like you were in your addiction, you were eating something, and you're like, well, maybe I should go to here. You were still doing maybe eating the ice cream, and maybe ate a half a tub, and then like, no, let me try this step. You were still in your addiction. I'm not saying that you're just going do a 90 degree and just shooting straight forward to the steps. So what we're trying to get across is you don't have to be perfect in saying, okay, I've got to give up all my addiction in order to do the steps.
Yeah.
You could eat a tub of ice cream and then still go do the steps, and that's still going, okay, I didn't do as much. That's what I was trying to say earlier, is that
Oh,
instead
yeah.
of eating the full carton of ice cream, you got halfway through, and you're like, no, I'm not really feeling this. Let me go do the steps. And you're
Yeah.
going, okay, I'm shifting away from, I was doing my addiction, but now I'm going to go and do this instead. You're shifting your focus.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. And it took practice, you know what I mean? I
Yeah,
love
for
that you
sure.
said it that way. Because yeah, I think that's beautiful. Because one thing I found through trial and error, lots of trial and error, is that it didn't matter when I keep calling it the God thing, but it didn't matter when I went to God and said, I am feeling some kind of way. Can you help regulate me? You know what I mean? Especially and so it didn't matter when I did that, because there would be times like as I was trying to learn this new way of life, and definitely still not yet understanding its power and what it could do for me. It hadn't been framed out that way to me by anyone. Like I said, I worked with 4 different sponsors. I suspect none of them actually were recovered. So there weren't really wasn't anyone to tell me this. But as I did it and felt an obligation to do it because I was working with a sponsor and all of these things, I noticed that, sometimes I would I would have a temptation to go and binge, and I would know, like, oh, I better do my step work, I better, what's 10, what's 11, what's 12, and I would feel better. I would notice I would feel better, and then the craving would go away. But sometimes I'd be like, oh, I know I probably should, but not today. I don't feel like it, and then I would just go straight to my binge food, and I'd be halfway through and be like, oh, I need to stop. I just need to go to God and see, if He can help me. And I would, and it would work. Sometimes I would go and do like, oh, I'm dysregulated. I know I'm dysregulated, or I don't know what word I use for it then. And I'm like, whatever. I don't care. This is big. I just need relief. Like, I couldn't care less about my sponsor. I don't care about God. Like, I just need to feel better. And I would go into my addiction. And at the end of that binge, feel sick. Here it is 4 a.m. I'm full. I'm sick to my stomach. I know I've destroyed my hope for tomorrow being productive and all of these things. And I'm like, and now I feel even worse. Maybe I should go to God. And I would. And that to me was very powerful, to recognize that it didn't matter when I went to God. If I had already moved into my addiction, it wasn't like I disqualified myself from the promise that God would still help me if I asked Him for help. It wasn't like, well, sorry, girlfriend, try next time because you got a full belly. So
Wait a day.
yeah, wait a day. Wait till it digests and try again. It wasn't like that.
Yeah.
God was just, it was like He was such a quiet, patient observer of like, when is she going to ask? When is she going to ask? When is she going to ask? As soon as I asked, He was like, I got you, girl. And to me, that was very significant, because for me, a lot of times I felt like it was one or the other. If I did my addiction, I was disqualifying myself from the promise that we find in the 12 steps. If I didn't, then I qualified for the promise, which I thought was being willing and able to white knuckle my way through cravings the rest of my life. But actually, the promise is the removal of the craving. It is the fixing of the pipe. It is the relieving of the addiction, which is beautiful. And and you do not disqualify yourself from that promise by messing up.
Awesome. Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. So, anyway, I think we're out of time for today. I think next time we'll might maybe dive deeper into the steps themselves. But thank you all for joining us, and hopefully this will help you guys understand better how to interact with the steps and how they can help you in your life. Thanks.
Thank you.